The air on the 47th floor of NextGen Solutions crackled with panic, a storm of urgency shattering the polished calm of San Francisco's financial tech empire. Phones buzzed like trapped bees, assistants darted through glass corridors, and sharp whispers cut through the tension. At the eye of the hurricane stood Sophia Chen, CEO, her flawless bun a crown of control, her steel-gray eyes slicing through the chaos. Her voice, cold as a winter blade, pierced the air. 11 minutes until the Chinese delegation arrives. If this deal collapses, it's not just my name that'll burn in tomorrow's headlines. Her chief of staff, pale and fumbling, stared at flickering screens. Ma'am, the interpreter? He had a seizure on the BART. There's no one else. Not for Mandarin. Not at this level. Sophia's jaw clenched, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. 18 months of delicate negotiations, a $500 million AI infrastructure deal hung on a thread. One misstep, one cultural misfire, and it would unravel like a house of cards. The room held its breath, the weight of her empire pressing down. Then from the shadowed edge of the corridor, a quiet voice broke the silence. I can translate. Heads turned. There he stood, Ethan Brooks, clad in faded janitor blues, gripping a mop like a scepter. His eyes, steady and unshaken, carried the quiet defiance of a man accustomed to being invisible. Sophia's brow arched, sharp as a guillotine. Excuse me? Mandarin, Ethan said again, his voice soft but clear as a bell. Fluent, with nuance, regional dialects included. A junior analyst's laugh ricocheted off the glass walls. Is he for real? Someone muttered. Sophia didn't flinch. She stalked toward him, her heels clicking like a predator's claws on marble. And who the hell are you? Ethan Brooks, he replied, calm as still water. Custodial services, night shift. You're joking, she snapped, her eyes narrowing to slits. No, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. But I get why you'd think so. Most people stop hearing me the moment they see the uniform. Sophia's gaze burned into him, measuring, dissecting. You expect me to stake this company's future on a janitor? Ethan shrugged, the gesture small but unyielding. Do you have a better option? The room fell silent, the question hanging like a guillotine blade. Sophia's lips tightened. Say something. In Mandarin. Now. He adjusted his grip on the mop, his movements deliberate, unhurried. Then, in flawless, elegant Mandarin, his voice flowed like silk. Women ki dai yu guifeng hesuo, kai chuang yiga shuangying de weilai. We look forward to partnering with your esteemed company to forge a future of mutual prosperity. The assistant's fingers froze over her keyboard. Sophia, though she didn't speak the language, felt the weight of his words, the cadence, the authority, the quiet power that needed no permission. Her eyes locked on his, searching for a crack in his composure. She found none. Get him a suit, she ordered, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. 10 minutes, and keep legal out of this. As she turned, Ethan's voice followed her, soft but piercing. You don't have to trust me, Ms. Chen. Just let me translate the truth. Sophia froze mid-step, the words echoing in her chest like a riddle she wasn't ready to unravel. Translate the truth. It stirred something deep, something she'd buried under layers of control and ambition. She didn't look back. 10 minutes later, the glass-walled boardroom gleamed under the San Francisco skyline, a stage for empires. Ethan stood in a borrowed charcoal blazer, the fit slightly off, like a man wearing someone else's skin. He didn't belong, yet his shoulders were squared, his eyes calm as a still sea. Sophia entered behind him, her voice a low warning. One wrong move, and security will drag you out before you can blink. Fair, Ethan said, meeting her gaze without a flicker of fear. The Chinese delegation arrived with clockwork precision, 5 men in tailored black suits, 1 woman with an emerald pin glinting like a promise. Sophia introduced Ethan as their in-house cultural liaison, a lie spun to dodge questions. The meeting began, a high-stakes dance of words and power. Ethan didn't just translate. He wove a tapestry of meaning, catching subtle double entendre, softening Sophia's razor-sharp demands into respectful strength. When Mr. Zhang, the delegation's leader, cracked a dry joke about American bluntness. Ethan's quick-witted proverb in response drew laughter that warmed the room. Sophia watched him, her hawk-like gaze faltering. For the first time in years, she wasn't the sharpest mind in the room. An hour later, as coffee was poured and contracts prepped, Mr. Zhang leaned toward Sophia, his English deliberate. "You're fortunate to have him," he nodded at Ethan. "Few grasp both the tongue and the soul." Sophia's smile was thin, a mask of control. "Quite unexpected." Mr. Zhang chuckled. "The best talents often are." The delegation left with signed drafts and cordial bows, their smiles carrying the weight of a sealed deal. The boardroom fell silent, the city's lights flickering beyond the windows, like 1,000 silent witnesses. Ethan stood by the glass, his reflection a ghost against the glowing skyline. Sophia's voice broke the stillness, sharp but curious. "Who are you, really?" He turned, his eyes carrying a quiet storm. "I told you, Ethan Brooks." "No," she said, stepping closer, her voice softer now, probing. "You don't speak like that, think like that, and scrub floors." "Who were you?" Ethan hesitated, the weight of years flickering across his face. "A linguistics professor at Stanford, before my wife died, before the lawsuit, before I lost everything." Sophia studied him, her steel gray eyes softening, just a fraction. "You're not what I expected." "I hear that a lot," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. A heavy pause settled between them, not tense but alive with unspoken truths. "You just saved a $500 million deal," she said, her tone almost grudging. "That's more than mops and buckets." Ethan's gaze drifted to the city below. "I wasn't saving the deal. I was proving I'm not invisible." Her eyes flickered, a crack in her fortress. For a moment, the untouchable CEO was just a woman staring at a man who had shaken her world. Her phone buzzed, shattering the silence. She glanced at it, then back at him, her voice cold again. "Get back in uniform. This never happened." Ethan's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Of course." Ethan Brooks paused at the boardroom door, his silhouette framed against the shimmering San Francisco skyline. Without turning, his voice sliced through the stillness, low and resolute. "One day, Sophia, you'll have to ask yourself why the only person you trusted in that room was the one you nearly turned away." Sophia Chen stood frozen, her steel gray eyes fixed on the empty doorway. His words lingered like a specter, haunting the glass walls. Long after Ethan vanished into the hum of the elevator, she remained alone, gazing out at the city's pulsing lights. "Translate the truth." The phrase clawed at her, unraveling the fortress of control she'd built around her heart. She whispered to the silent skyline, "Translate the truth." The words felt foreign, heavy with a burden she wasn't ready to bear. In her corner office, Sophia stood with arms crossed, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing a city that glittered with cold ambition. The deal was sealed, the Chinese delegation charmed, and the board would laud her by morning. Yet triumph rang hollow. One question gnawed at her, relentless and unshakable. Who the hell is Ethan Brooks? Behind her, Claire Nguyen, her executive assistant, slipped into the room, her steps tentative as if navigating a minefield. "Legal's asking if we should draft a short-term NDA for the janitor." Sophia turned, her gaze sharp enough to cut steel. "He has a name." Claire blinked, caught off guard. "Right, Ethan. He's back in maintenance, changing out of the suit as we speak, like it never happened." Sophia nodded, her face a mask of control. "Make sure it stays that way." Claire hesitated, her voice soft but daring. "With respect, ma'am, that man just secured our future in Asia. Shouldn't we acknowledge him?" Sophia's voice dropped, smooth as silk, sharp as a blade. "In my world, Claire, gratitude isn't currency. Results are. He's already been paid in relevance." Claire nodded and retreated, leaving Sophia in a silence that buzzed with something unfamiliar. A melody cut off mid-note, a story unfinished. 2 floors below, Ethan stood before a cracked locker mirror, peeling off the borrowed blazer to slip back into his worn janitor blues. The uniform aged him, dragging him back to the shadows of who he'd become. Each snap of the buttons felt like a surrender, yet a spark in his chest refused to die. He whispered to his reflection, "Back to the shadows, Professor." The words rang hollow, as if the man in the suit had rekindled a life he hadn't fully buried. A knock broke his reverie. Claire, the HR liaison, peeked in, her eyes cautious but warm. "Message from legal. They want you to sign something. Confidentiality." Ethan's tired smile flickered. "Of course they do." He followed her through a quiet hallway, one he hadn't walked since the night Grace died. The last time he'd worn anything but gloves and a cleaning badge. The last time he'd felt like more than a ghost. In conference room 3C, Sophia waited, her presence filling the space like a storm held in check. "I thought you'd send a suit," Ethan said, his voice dry but steady. She didn't offer a seat. "I prefer to look people in the eye when I erase them," she said coolly, sliding a folder across the table. "Standard NDA. Covers everything, down to the tea brand served. Nothing personal." Ethan opened it, his eyes skimming the sterile lines that screamed, "We own your silence." He set it down, untouched. "I'm not signing." Sophia's brow lifted, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Why not?" "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "But I won't pretend it didn't happen." Her eyes narrowed, probing for an angle. "What do you want? Money? A title? A LinkedIn post?" "I want my voice," Ethan said, leaning forward, his gaze locking with hers. "That's it." A shadow passed through her eyes, too swift to name. "You don't strike me as someone who gives up leverage." "I had leverage once," he said, his voice raw with memory, "and I lost everything. My job, my home, my wife. You know what broke me most?" She waited, her breath catching. "Not the loss," he said. "The silence that followed. That's what kills you. The sound of being forgotten." Sophia's arms folded, but a foreign ache bloomed in her chest, a pang she hadn't felt in years. She knew that silence. She'd built her empire in it. "What's your angle, Ethan?" "No angle," he said, his eyes burning with quiet fire. "Just a man trying to be seen again." Later that night, Sophia sat in the dim glow of her penthouse, surrounded by glass and chrome that gleamed like a polished cage. She sipped scotch, its smoky bite stirring memories she'd long buried. Her laptop glowed, the name Ethan Brooks typed into the search bar. Results flooded in, each a shard of his shattered past. Former Stanford linguistics professor, specialist in sociolinguistics, whistleblower in a wrongful death case against Bay Area Health Network. Case dismissed. Tenure revoked. Career erased. Wife deceased. Then a photo stopped her cold. 8 years old, it showed Ethan at a lectern, vibrant and alive beside Grace. Radiant, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, her smile a beacon of hope. Sophia stared, her breath hitching. "He used to belong to this world," she whispered, and for the first time in a decade, she envied not power, but loss, the kind that carved a man into something unbreakable. The next morning, as Ethan polished the marble lobby, a man in an Armani suit approached, his cologne sharp and expensive. "Ethan Brooks?" Ethan looked up, wary. "Depends. James Tran, board liaison," the man said, his smile calculated but warm. "You made waves yesterday. Some board members want to meet you. Off the record, discreetly." Ethan straightened, his brow furrowing. "Why?" James's smile deepened. "Because you remind them what it means to speak without permission. That scares Sophia, which is why they're intrigued." He slipped a card into Ethan's pocket. "When you're ready to stop mopping floors and start shaping futures, call me." That night, Ethan walked home, Lily's tiny hand tucked in his. The city hummed around them, but his mind churned with possibilities and warnings. Lily looked up, her eyes bright as her mother's. "Daddy, did you win your meeting yesterday?" He smiled, soft and uncertain. "I don't know yet." She tilted her head, thoughtful. "Did you speak like you taught me? With your heart?" Ethan's chest tightened, her question echoing Grace's voice. "I tried," he said. Lily grinned, her missing teeth a badge of innocence. "Then you won." Back in her office, Sophia opened her inbox, the city's glow casting long shadows across her desk. One email stood out, marked audit request, Stanford file. She opened it, her pulse quickening. Inside was a scanned memo from 8 years ago, her signature scrawled across it, her decision as head of external risk at the firm that backed Bay Area Health Network. She'd greenlit silencing Ethan's case to protect investors. The realization hit like a blade. The man she'd tried to erase was one she'd already buried. She closed the laptop, her hands trembling. "So this is the voice I silenced," she whispered to the empty room. The weight of it wasn't business anymore. It was personal. Rain fell in silver streaks, painting San Francisco's towers with a mournful sheen. In a cramped apartment above a Mission Street deli, Ethan knelt beside a makeshift desk where Lily sat, cross-legged, humming softly. Her tongue poked out as she colored a stick figure, a tall man in a navy suit standing in a gleaming tower. "Is that me?" Ethan asked, cocking an eyebrow. "Yup," Lily said, not looking up. "You in a fancy office, like a storybook hero." He chuckled, the sound warm but tinged with doubt. "I'm not sure I belong in a storybook, sweetheart." Lily's eyes met his, serious and wise beyond her years. "But you talked like one, Daddy. You said words that made people listen. That's magic." He brushed a curl from her forehead, his heart aching with love. "Words are only magic when they're true, Lily. Otherwise, they're just noise in a suit." She nodded solemnly and handed him the drawing, her small fingers steady. "Take it with you today, in case you forget who you are." Ethan stood at the corner of Market and Montgomery, staring up at NextGen Solutions' glass monolith. For the first time, he didn't feel small stepping inside. The hush of power, the choreographed dance of wealth, it no longer dwarfed him. He wasn't just the janitor nor the translator, but something in between, a man on the cusp of becoming. At the security desk, Claire waited, her eyes avoiding his. "They moved your shift to the 28th floor. Legal's orders." Ethan smirked. "I know, and they know I know." "They're watching you now, Ethan," she said, her voice low. "Don't let the shine blind you." Before he could reply, she handed him a key card. "Also, she wants to see you. Sophia, penthouse." The elevator ride stretched into eternity, each floor a heartbeat in the silence. When the doors parted, Ethan Brooks stepped into a world of pristine opulence. White marble floors gleaming under golden accents. A grand piano untouched, its silence louder than any melody. At the far end of the penthouse, Sophia Chen stood barefoot, a mug cradled in her hands, her hair loose and cascading over gray cashmere. Gone was the armor of the CEO. This was a woman unguarded, human before the clock struck 10. Ethan blinked, caught off guard by her vulnerability. "Human before 10 a.m.? He said, half teasing. She didn't smile, but she didn't correct him either. "I wanted to see the man who made a boardroom listen," Sophia said, her voice low, gesturing to a chair. Ethan stayed standing, his stance firm. "Not really my place." Her eyes flickered with something like respect. "You made it your place the moment you spoke Mandarin." Silence hung between them, heavy but not hostile, a fragile bridge between two worlds. "I looked into your past," she said finally, her fingers tapping the mug. "You were on track to chair your department at Stanford. Tenure, book deals." She paused, her gaze piercing. "And you lost it all." Ethan nodded once, his jaw tight, memories stirring like ash. She sipped her coffee, then asked, softer now, "Why didn't you fight harder?" His voice was quiet, raw with truth. "Because by the time I saw the cost of the fight, the person I was fighting for was already gone." Sophia looked away, her jaw clenching, as if to hold back a tide. "That hospital," Ethan added, his voice steady but laced with pain. "You were part of the investment group, weren't you?" She didn't answer immediately, her silence a confession. Then, barely audible, "I signed the kill order. Risk mitigation." Ethan exhaled, slow and deliberate. "I figured. I didn't know who you were then." "No one ever does," she said, meeting his gaze. Something cracked in her eyes, not loud but unmistakable, like a fault line in her fortress. "I used to believe the system worked, until I built it." Ethan studied her, seeing not the untouchable CEO, but a woman living among the rubble of her own choices. He reached into his jacket and handed her a folded piece of paper. What's this? Sophia asked, her fingers hesitating. Lily made it, Ethan said. Told me to bring it in case I forgot who I am. Sophia unfolded it, her breath catching. A stick figure of Ethan in a suit stood in a building of stars. A little girl with a purple crayon smiling up at him. She stared, her eyes tracing the lines as if they held a truth she'd forgotten. She thinks you're a hero, Sophia whispered. She thinks I'm trying, Ethan replied softly. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. No one's ever drawn me like that. Ethan's gaze held hers. Maybe because you've been too busy erasing yourself. That afternoon, the boardroom felt like a frostbitten arena, the air sharp with unspoken accusations. Ethan was summoned, not as a janitor, not as a translator, but as a witness. The board called it an internal clarification for the Pacific Ventures deal, but the tone was a blade. This was a cross-examination. Nathan Reed, the CFO, led the charge, his smile sharp as a crocodile's. You deviated from the script multiple times during the negotiation, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Ethan didn't flinch. I adapted to tone and cultural nuance. It's called fluency. Nathan's eyes narrowed. That wasn't your role. Ethan's smile was calm, unshaken. And yet it saved you $500 million. Sophia entered mid-exchange, her gaze locking onto Nathan like a hawk. She didn't sit. She stood behind Ethan, a silent declaration. Nathan scoffed. What do you want, Mr. Brooks? Ethan paused, then turned to the table of suits, his voice steady. A fair question. I don't want a promotion. I don't want applause. I want the next janitor who speaks 4 languages to not have to mop your mistakes to be seen. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Sophia stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. He speaks for me. Gasps rippled through the boardroom, raw and unfiltered. Nathan turned to her, incredulous. You're endorsing this disruption? Sophia's eyes were steel, unyielding. No, I'm endorsing this man. And if disruption is what it takes to remember who we're supposed to be, then yes, I welcome it. That evening, Ethan picked up Lily from school, her backpack swinging as she skipped beside him under a sky painted soft orange. Did you give her my picture? She asked, her voice bright with hope. He smiled, warmth breaking through his weariness. I did. Did she like it? Ethan looked down at her, her eyes so like Grace's, full of questions that pierced his heart. She looked at it like someone remembering their own name. Lily nodded, wise beyond her years. Sometimes pictures say what hearts forget. Ethan stopped walking, her words striking a chord deep within. Lily, he said softly, how did you get so smart? She grinned, her missing teeth a badge of joy. I've got a daddy who used to be a professor. His laugh rang out, full and unbroken for the first time in years. In her penthouse, Sophia pinned Lily's drawing to the inside of her wardrobe, a secret kept for her alone. Beside it, she added a note in her own hand. Maybe it's not too late. Outside, the rain stopped, leaving the city glistening with possibility. Near midnight, the elevator chimed on the 28th floor, where shadows danced under the dull green glow of emergency exit signs. Ethan stepped out, wheeling his mop bucket, whistling a faint tune from better days. He cherished these hours when ambition slept and the city exhaled. But tonight, something felt different, a quiet charge in the air. Halfway down the hallway, a sliver of light spilled from beneath the glass door of conference room A. Unusual. He tried to pass, but instinct stopped him, sharper than curiosity. The door was unlocked. Inside, papers littered the glass table. Draft contracts, memos, red-lined emails between legal and executive teams. At the center, a folder marked Privileged Internal Review, Pacific Ventures, Back Channel. Ethan hesitated, his pulse quickening. This wasn't his fight, but Lily's words echoed. Sometimes pictures say what hearts forget. He didn't need a picture now. He needed the truth. He stepped inside and began to read. In her office, Sophia stood by the window, the skyline a quiet constellation. She wasn't working. She was waiting, though she told herself it wasn't for him. The extra pot of coffee, the unlocked executive elevator, mere coincidence, she insisted. But when her phone buzzed and Claire's voice came through, low and urgent, "He's in room A, legal floor. I think he saw the file." Sophia's eyes closed. This wasn't the plan. Ethan stood frozen, the documents painting a story he'd feared but never confirmed. The Pacific Ventures deal wasn't just a partnership, it was a facade, a shell network funneling resources, masking insider transactions. Names leaped from the pages. Nathan Reed, Mr. Zhang, names from Sophia's old fund, and one circled in red, scribbled in haste, SC. His hands trembled as the door opened behind him. "You shouldn't be here," Sophia said, her voice low, controlled, but wavering like a candle in a storm. Ethan turned slowly, the folder still in his hands. "Was it you?" She stepped forward, silent. "Did you know?" He pressed, his voice steady but burning. "From the beginning?" "Not the full picture," she said, her words measured. "I had suspicions. No proof." He raised the folder. "You signed half of this." "I signed the optics," she snapped, her jaw tight. "Not the guts of it." "That's convenient," Ethan muttered. Sophia's eyes flashed. "What do you want me to say, Ethan? That I was complicit? That I buried things for performance metrics?" "Fine. I did. Questions slow down stock prices." He shook his head, disappointment heavy in his voice. "You're better than this." "No," she said, her voice raw. "I'm just honest about the ugliness of how things work." Ethan's gaze burned into hers. "2 days ago, you looked me in the eye and said I wasn't invisible. I believed you. And I meant it," she said, her voice breaking. "Then why are you still protecting the people who buried you with me?" Silence fell like a gavel, heavy and final. Sophia exhaled, her voice soft. "Because the system has claws, and if I go down, I don't go alone." Ethan didn't sleep that night. On the pull-out couch, Lily stirred beside him, clutching her purple crayon like a talisman. He watched her, his heart heavy with promises broken by fear since Grace's death. By sunrise, his decision was made. The next morning, Sophia entered the main conference room, expecting silence. Instead, Ethan was there, not alone. Claire sat beside him, James Tran stood behind, and a binder labeled Whistleblower Dossier. Pacific Ventures lay before them. Sophia stopped cold, her breath catching. Ethan didn't rise. "You said I made people listen," he said quietly. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here so Lily grows up in a world where truth isn't punished." Sophia stared at the binder, then at Ethan. "This could burn everything down." "Then let it burn," he said, his voice steady as stone. "And maybe something better grows from the ashes." She was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she picked up the binder and sat beside him. Not across, but beside. Claire blinked, stunned. James smiled faintly. "That's unexpected." Sophia glanced at Ethan, her eyes softer now. So was he. "Good," Lily whispered, her voice a soft beacon in the fading light. "Because the world needs someone who remembers how to speak the truth." Ethan pulled her close, her small frame nestled against him on the park bench. For the first time in years, he wasn't merely surviving, he was becoming, his heart stirring with a purpose he'd thought long buried. The San Francisco sky glowed orange, soft as a promise, as Lily's arms wrapped around him, anchoring him to a future he dared to imagine. In her penthouse, Sophia stood alone, the city's lights flickering below like a constellation of forgotten dreams. Her gaze lingered on an old black and white photograph on the mantel, a young Sophia clutching her mother's hand, eyes wide with innocence. She reached into her drawer, fingers brushing the folded drawing Lily had given Ethan. She unfolded it, the stick figure in a suit standing tall, a little girl's purple crayon weaving a world of stars. Carefully, she pinned it beside the photograph, a quiet vow. Even power needed reminders of innocence. Even CEOs needed children to show them who they could still become. The following Monday, NextGen Solutions lobby shimmered with curated perfection, polished marble, practiced smiles, the scent of overpriced coffee drifting from the executive floor. Yet something had shifted beneath the surface, a subtle fracture in the facade. As Ethan passed, whispers trailed him. Some colleagues offered tentative smiles, Others averted their eyes as if he were a loaded gun left on a table, harmless until given a reason to fire. At 10:07 a.m., Inamra's summons came. Executive suite, Sophia's office. The receptionist didn't bother with directions. Ethan's presence was no longer a surprise. Sophia stood with her back to him, arms folded, staring at a sculpture of two birds frozen in mid-flight, their wings outstretched but never landing. "I had this imported from Florence," she said without turning, her voice soft but weighted. "It's supposed to represent freedom." Ethan took a slow breath, his eyes tracing the delicate lines of the sculpture. "Ever wonder if they're flying towards something, or just away?" She turned, her navy suit impeccable, red heels sharp enough to crush ambition, but her eyes betrayed her, quieter, bruised, human. She slid a document folder across the glass desk. Ethan didn't touch it. "What's this? An offer?" "I didn't apply for anything." Sophia sat, folding her hands, her voice lower than usual. "I know, but I've learned the most qualified person in the room is often the one nobody asked." He opened the folder slowly, scanning the words. "Director of Cross-Cultural Communications. Full-time, six-figure salary, discretionary stock options." He stared, then met her gaze. "Why?" "You're too smart to be mopping floors, Ethan," she said, her tone sharp with conviction. "This isn't pity, it's recognition. And maybe a little reparation." His jaw tightened. "Reparation doesn't come in paychecks." "I know," she replied, her voice softening. "But sometimes it starts there." He closed the folder, skepticism flickering in his eyes. "The others won't be thrilled." She smiled faintly, a spark of defiance in her expression. "They're not supposed to be." A pause settled between them, heavy with possibility. "Why me?" Ethan asked carefully. Sophia leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Because you're the first person in 10 years who didn't try to impress me and still moved me." He stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "You really believe change can happen inside these walls?" "I don't know," she admitted, her honesty raw. "But if it can, I want you beside me when it starts." Later that day, Ethan returned to the 28th floor to gather his old belongings. A few personal items, scribbled notebooks, a worn cleaning rag that had survived 3 apartments and countless heartaches. Claire waited by the janitor's closet, arms crossed, a knowing smile on her lips. "So, you're joining the suits?" Ethan's eyes glinted with resolve. "I'm joining the war." She laughed softly. "Just don't lose your soul in their meetings." "Don't worry," he said, his voice warm. "Lily will sniff it out if I do." He paused, then added, "Ever think maybe we weren't put here to change the world?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you doing it?" He thought for a moment, his voice soft but certain. "Because my daughter's watching." That evening, Ethan and Lily sat on their tiny balcony, knees touching, the city lighting up below like it was remembering how to live. Lily clutched a mug of warm cocoa, its steam curling in the cool air. Ethan held the unsigned offer letter, its weight heavier than the paper itself. "I don't know if I'm brave enough for this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily didn't blink, her eyes bright with her mother's wisdom. "Remember what Mommy said when you were scared?" He nodded, the memory sharp. "Bravery isn't not being scared. It's doing the hard thing scared." She beamed, bumping her shoulder against his. "So do the hard thing." He looked at her, his heart swelling. "You really are your mother's daughter." "And you're yours too," she said, grinning. His laugh broke free, warm and full, and with steady hands he signed the paper, a quiet vow to the future. 3 days later, a nameplate gleamed outside a new office. Real walls, a view, a coffee machine that didn't demand quarters. Ethan stood there, awkward in the silence, unsure how to fill the space his life had become. Sophia peered in, her voice laced with mock surprise. "No tie." "I like breathing," he replied, a smile tugging at his lips. She stepped inside, surveying the space. "We need you in the boardroom at 11. Beijing's pushing back." He nodded. "I read the brief." She paused, then said softly, "Thank you for choosing to stay." He looked at her, really looked, seeing past the title to the woman beneath. "Are you ready for this?" She didn't answer immediately, her eyes tracing the lines of his face. I've spent my life building walls to keep control. You kicked one in without permission, he finished, smiling. Sorry about that. Don't be, she said, her voice warm with something new. I finally see daylight. The board meeting crackled with tension, a storm brewing in polished suits. Nathan Reed spoke with venomous precision. Promoting Mr. Brooks without board approval is reckless. We're a company, not a charity. Ethan stayed silent, his calm a shield. Sophia rose, her voice cutting through the air. If that's your definition of charity, Nathan, then perhaps what we lack isn't oversight, but imagination. Nathan sneered. The board demands a vote. James Tran stood slowly, his presence steady. And some of us demand a better future. Gasps echoed, sharp and real. Sophia's gaze held Nathan's, unyielding. Vote on structure, vote on strategy, but you cannot vote on human dignity. That night, Sophia sat alone in her office, the city's lights a quiet backdrop. Ethan knocked softly, holding 2 coffees. Thought you might need this, he said. She took the cup, their fingers brushing, a fleeting warmth. I'm not used to gratitude, she admitted, her voice soft. I'm not used to power, he replied, meeting her gaze. Her eyes softened, a crack in her armor. You're more dangerous than I expected. He smiled. I could say the same. They shared a silence that felt full, not empty. Sophia stepped closer, her voice barely audible. You once asked if I was flying towards something or away? Ethan nodded. Well, she said, her eyes searching his. Maybe I was circling, waiting for someone to teach me how to land. He held her gaze, saying nothing, because some truths needed no words. Only presence. Claire Nguyen stood at the edge of Sophia's office, a folder clutched in her hands, her spine stiff as a soldier's. The glass walls reflected a woman who had spent too long silent in rooms where she once dreamed of speaking freely. Sophia looked up, irritation pinching her brow. Is this urgent, Claire? It is, Claire said, her voice soft but unwavering. But not for you alone. For someone who deserves better than silence? Sophia's eyes rose, sharp with curiosity. Is this about your promotion again? No, Claire replied, stepping forward, her resolve like steel. This is about what we've hidden, about what you signed off on 3 years ago. Project LifeSync. A cold ripple coursed through Sophia's chest. Claire placed the folder on the desk. The numbers were doctored, liability reports buried. Your name and Nathan's are all over the clearance. Sophia reached for the folder, her fingers hesitant as if it might burn. Why now? Because I saw a janitor walk into a room of billionaires and speak truth with no badge, no armor, Claire said, her voice steady, and because you stood silent while the room laughed. Sophia Chen stood silent, the folder trembling in her hands. She opened it, and her breath caught at the sight of a photograph. Grace, Ethan's late wife, radiant in a white lab coat, a prototype cradled in her hands, her eyes alight with hope. You knew her? Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire Nguyen nodded, her gaze steady but heavy with regret. She pitched the LifeSync upgrade to our acquisition team. They ignored her. 3 months later, a system failure tied to a bug we could have fixed took her life. If anyone had listened, Sophia stared at the image, Grace's face searing into her memory. Her voice dropped to a fragile whisper. I signed her silence. Claire's eyes didn't waver. Yes, and maybe that's why Ethan doesn't scream at you. Maybe he's waiting to hear something worth listening to. The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through Sophia's carefully guarded heart. That evening, in the dim glow of her penthouse, Sophia sat alone, the city buzzing below like a hive she could never escape. She clutched a phone she hadn't touched in years, its weight unfamiliar in her hands. The number belonged to her mother, still in San Francisco's Chinatown. She dialed, the rings echoing like a heartbeat. Ma, Sophia said in Cantonese, her voice small, almost childlike. Silence stretched, then her mother's voice cracked through the line. Sophia, what's wrong? I remembered something you said, Sophia whispered, her throat tight. You told me I became powerful, but forgot how to be strong. Her mother's breathing was slow, careful, a lifeline across the years. I think I forgot how to be a person, Sophia confessed, her voice breaking. I stopped seeing faces. I only saw threats or tools. A long pause hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Then her mother spoke, gentle but firm. Do you remember why you applied to Stanford? Sophia's lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. Because I wanted to be a teacher. Yes, her mother said. You wanted to teach kids to speak up, even when their voices shook. What happened to that girl? Sophia's voice faltered, a tear tracing her cheek. She got promoted, she said quietly, and stopped speaking altogether. The next morning, Ethan found a note slipped under the janitor's lounge door, written on cream stationery in neat, deliberate handwriting. If I were to change, would it be too late? Unsigned, but he knew the hand that penned it. He read it twice, the words sinking into him like a quiet prayer. He tucked it into the worn copy of The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho he always carried, its pages dog-eared from years of solace. He didn't need to know who wrote it. He already did. That evening, Ethan met Claire in a quiet nook beneath the Embarcadero, the city's pulse humming in the distance. She looked weary but lighter, as if a burden had lifted. You were brave, he told her, his voice warm with respect. No, she replied, shaking her head. I was late, but I'm here now. She slid a USB drive across the table, its weight heavier than its size. Everything you need, internal reports, emails, a timeline of the cover-up, it's enough to get NextGen investigated and Sophia implicated. Ethan stared at it, his heart a battlefield of resolve and doubt. She came to you? Claire nodded. Didn't try to stop me. Just said, do what you think is right. Ethan's gaze drifted to the city lights, loud and uncaring. That's not the woman I thought she was. Claire's eyes softened. Maybe she's changing. He took the USB, its cold metal a promise of truth stirring in the shadows. Back home, in their cramped apartment, Ethan sat beside Lily as she colored on the floor, her small hands weaving stories in vibrant hues. She looked up, her eyes bright and searching. Daddy, what do you do when someone says sorry but not with words? He blinked, caught off guard by her wisdom. Why do you ask? Because I think someone said sorry to you, but you didn't smile. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, his heart swelling with love. Sometimes, baby, the biggest apologies are silent, but they still matter. Lily handed him her drawing. 3 figures, a tall man with messy hair, a little girl, and a woman in a gray dress, her hands not touching, but close. A golden bridge stretched between them, glowing with quiet hope. What's this? He asked, his voice soft. Lily beamed, her missing teeth a badge of joy. It's you, me, and the lady who looked at me like I mattered. Ethan stared at the bridge, its golden lines shimmering in his mind. That's a lot of gold. Lily shrugged, her voice wise beyond her years. It's not gold. It's quiet. That night, Ethan sat at his tiny desk, a single lamp casting a warm glow over his fingers. He opened his laptop and began to type. Not an expose, not yet, but a letter to someone he never thought he'd write to. Sophia, you asked if change is too late. I don't believe it ever is, but change without truth is just a performance, and truth without action is cruelty. You were the reason Grace's voice was buried, but now you're the reason mine might be heard. That doesn't make you my friend, but it might make you human again. You don't have to be what they expect. Not anymore. He paused, then hit print, folded the letter, and slipped it into an envelope. He'd deliver it tomorrow, not for her, but for himself, for the man he was becoming. In her office, Sophia sat motionless at the edge of her glass desk, the city blinking gold and indifferent beyond the windows. Ethan's letter lay unfolded before her, its words cutting like salt across wounds she thought had healed. You were the reason my wife's voice was buried, but now you're the reason mine might be heard. She closed her eyes, Grace's face vivid in her mind. Not just a file photo now, but a woman with eyes that hoped, waited, trusted. And Sophia had failed her. For years, she'd told herself the system's flaws weren't her responsibility. That emotion would topple her empire. But tonight, something crumbled. Her pride, her armor, the lie she'd lived by. Across the city in a worn one-bedroom apartment, Ethan sat at a table, a candle flickering beside him. He was writing again, not to Sophia this time, but to Grace. The words spilled like a confession held back for years. You would have loved her, Grace. Not at first. She's sharp, like broken glass. But I saw a crack today. A real one. You told me not to trust people who've never bled. Lily asked if someone can say sorry without words. I think Sophia's trying, or maybe I just want to believe she is. Either way, I'm not angry anymore, not like I was. I just want something true to rise from what we lost. His hands trembled as he folded the letter and slipped it into a shoebox of unsent truths, his private sanctuary. He went to Lily's room where she slept, arm draped over her stuffed rabbit, one foot peeking from the blanket. He kissed her forehead, whispering, "You're the reason I never stayed broken." Meanwhile, Sophia stood barefoot on her building's rooftop, the wind tugging at her silk sleeves. She remembered moving into this penthouse, 14 floors above the city's noise, believing power would taste sweeter up here. It didn't. The moon hid behind clouds and something ancient stirred within her. She whispered into the night, "I'm sorry, Grace." Then louder as if the city might hear, "I'm sorry." It wasn't redemption, but it was a start, a crack in the fortress, letting in the first light of truth. Sophia Chen gazed skyward, the moon veiled by clouds, its light a faint promise in the San Francisco night. A primal urge stirred within her, raw and unguarded, pulling words from her lips. "I'm sorry, Grace," she whispered into the wind. A pause, then louder, her voice trembling with resolve. "I'm sorry." It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was real, a crack in the armor she'd worn too long. The next morning before the city woke, Sophia slipped into NextGen Solutions' office, hours before her team would arrive. She paused in the boardroom, staring at the chair she'd always claimed, a throne of power. Today she didn't sit. Instead, she walked to the janitor's closet and knocked, her heart pounding like a drum beat in the silence. Ethan Brooks opened the door, surprise flickering across his face. "I thought CEOs didn't do morning rounds," he said, a half smile softening his words. Sophia's gaze was steady, stripped of her usual steel. "I'm not here as a CEO." He stepped aside, letting her into the cramped space, scented with bleach and old pine, yet warmer than any chandelier-lit room. She glanced at the mop in the corner, the neatly labeled shelves, and a photo of Lily taped beside the schedule. "You run this place like a cathedral," she murmured, her voice tinged with awe. Ethan shrugged, his eyes steady. "I have to. The floor is the only thing people notice when it's dirty." Sophia turned to him, her voice soft but weighted. "I read your letter. Twice." Ethan nodded, waiting, his silence an invitation. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, her eyes searching his. "I don't even know if I forgive myself, but I need you to know. I see it now. Not just the mistake, but the ripple." Ethan folded his arms, his voice low. "The ripple? It's not just you," she said, her words heavy with truth. "The system's built to forget faces like Grace's, and yours." "You're just the part that had a name," Ethan said, his tone calm but piercing. Sophia's voice softened, almost breaking. "And you're the part that gave it back." Silence stretched between them, a fragile thread weaving their shared wounds. She whispered, "How did you survive it? Losing her?" Ethan's eyes glazed, memories rising like ghosts. "I didn't. Not all the way. I just learned to live with the whole." Another silence, heavier now. Sophia stepped closer, her hands at her sides, unguarded. "I've lived in rooms where no one told me the truth. I don't know what it means to start over." "You don't start over," Ethan said, his voice steady as stone. "You just stop running." Her eyes, red but tearless, held his. "Will you be there?" "I already am," he said, and for the first time neither looked away, their gazes locked in a quiet pact. Later that night, Sophia returned to her office, alone but not as she once was. She opened the safe behind her bookshelf, its contents a gallery of past decisions, past ghosts. She pulled out Grace's file, her own signature sharp and detached at the bottom. With a trembling hand, she crossed it out in red ink, then wrote beneath it. Her voice was silenced but not forgotten. She took a breath, steadying herself, and began drafting an email to the board. Subject: resignation consideration. Immediate review requested. The boardroom had never been quieter, the air thick with unspoken tension. 12 executives sat in high-backed leather chairs, their suits pressed sharp enough to slice through the silence. Beyond the glass, the city buzzed, but inside, time held its breath. Ethan stood at the far end of the table, not in his janitor's uniform, but in a simple navy blazer, an old dress shirt carrying the faint scent of starch and courage. To his left, Claire adjusted her glasses, her hands steady, her eyes like steel. Across the table, Sophia sat, not at the head but midway down, a deliberate choice. "I don't represent power today," she'd told her assistant. "Just myself." The chairman cleared his throat, his voice formal but strained. "Mr. Brooks, you've requested this extraordinary hearing to present grievances regarding misconduct. The floor is yours." Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath. He clicked the remote, and the first slide flickered onto the screen. NextGen's internal acquisition, undisclosed liability files. The room shifted, suits leaning forward, eyes narrowing. "This," Ethan began, his voice steady as a heartbeat, "is the acquisition file for a medical startup developing low-cost sepsis diagnostics. It was dissolved after acquisition, not for failure, but because it threatened our pharma partner's premium product line." He paused, letting the weight settle. "My wife Grace was a co-founder. She died from a delayed sepsis diagnosis in a hospital that didn't use the technology she helped create." A hush fell, heavy as thunder held at bay. "This isn't about vengeance," Ethan continued, his gaze sweeping the board, locking eyes with each member. "It's about responsibility, not just for her death, but for a system that rewards silence and buries voices for convenience." Here, he clicked again, revealing internal communications from 6 years ago, flagging the diagnostic tool's long-term value. Dismissed. "I was a linguistics professor at Stanford," he said. "I lost that job because of a whistleblower report I filed against research fraud. Sophia Chen, our CEO, signed the recommendation that ended my career." Sophia didn't flinch. She stood, her voice even but raw. "I did." The room froze. A collective breath held. "I signed that letter," she said, her gaze unwavering. "I also signed the approval that dissolved Grace's company. For years, I told myself I was following procedure, that integrity meant protecting the company." She turned to the board, then to Ethan, her hands trembling. "But integrity without compassion isn't integrity. It's arrogance in disguise." Gasps rippled through the room. A pen clattered to the table. Sophia's voice rose slightly, steady but fierce. "I knew Mr. Brooks had the right to speak. I tried to silence him again, out of reflex, fear, pride. He persisted, and because of him, I saw the fracture I'd become." She paused, her voice breaking. "I came to this company to make it powerful. I leave today because I finally understand what it means to make it honorable." The chairman blinked, stunned. "You're resigning?" Sophia nodded, her resolve unshakable. "Effective immediately. I'll cooperate with all investigations and waive any severance or protections. My legacy isn't the empire I built. It's the moment I chose to let it go." Claire stepped forward, her voice calm and clear. "I've reviewed the documents and consulted third-party counsel. I'm willing to serve as interim director of the ethics committee to ensure transparency." The board murmured, a cautious agreement forming. Silence settled, all eyes turning to Ethan. He didn't gloat or smile. "I came here with truth," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. "I leave with something more, the hope that no one else will be erased the way we were." He picked up his folder and turned to leave, but Sophia's voice stopped him. "Ethan." He paused, turning back. She walked toward him, each step shedding invisible armor. "I want you to know," she said, her voice soft but firm, "you didn't just change a company today. You changed the way I hear the world." Ethan Brooks met Sophia Chen's gaze, seeing past the title, past the cold precision of the CEO. Fine lines framed her eyes now, not from frowning, but from waking up to a truth she'd long ignored. "I didn't want revenge," he said, his voice steady but raw. "I just wanted someone to say, 'I see you.'" Her whisper came soft, almost fragile. I do. He nodded, a quiet acknowledgement, then turned and walked out, leaving behind not just a boardroom but a battlefield where justice had finally whispered back. The next morning, the air in NextGen Solutions lobby felt lighter, as if a long-sealed window had been cracked open, letting the weight of years slip away. Ethan stepped from the elevator, back in his worn janitor's attire. No blazer, no performance, just the man who had endured too much to pretend. Yet his gait carried a new certainty, a stride that no longer expected invisibility. Waiting outside the conference room, Claire Nguyen held 2 coffees, offering one with a small nod. You know, she said, her voice warm with a hint of mischief, most people don't get to walk back into a place after they burn it down. Ethan took the cup, a faint smile breaking through. Maybe we didn't burn it down. Maybe we just turned on the lights. Claire chuckled softly, her eyes glinting. You always talk like a teacher. Some languages stick, don't they? Inside, a handful of board members waited, their postures less rigid, their faces more human than the day before. The chairman spoke first, his tone measured but respectful. Mr. Brooks, we reviewed your case overnight. Your actions, though unconventional, upheld ethical standards and exposed flaws buried too long in our structure. The board voted unanimously to offer you a senior position. He slid a folder across the table. Executive Director of Global Communications. Ethan opened it, his eyes scanning the contract, but his heart remained unmoved. I'm grateful, he said slowly, his voice calm but resolute. But I can't accept. A pause, sharp as glass, filled the room. May I ask why? A board member asked, confusion etching her face. Ethan closed the folder gently, his fingers steady. Because what I care about can't be done from that office. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a worn, handwritten note, its edges soft from time. This is a letter my daughter Lily wrote when she thought I didn't get the janitor job. She said, maybe they don't need you to clean. Maybe they need you to teach them what to hear. The room stilled, the weight of a child's wisdom settling over them. I want to propose something else, Ethan continued, his voice steady as a heartbeat. A language initiative, a real one. A program to teach young people, especially those silenced or sidelined, how to speak with clarity, dignity, and strength. Not just English, not just Mandarin, the language of presence. He turned to Claire, his eyes warm with trust. And I want her to co-direct it. Claire's lips parted, genuine surprise softening her features. I second that, she said, her voice catching, a quiet tremor of resolve. The chairman leaned back, considering, then nodded. We'll fund the pilot, full support, with oversight and a long-term vision. Ethan stood, his shoulders squared. Thank you for listening. As the meeting adjourned, Ethan walked the long hallway toward the elevator, the city's hum a distant pulse beyond the glass. At the far end, Sophia waited, her CEO armor gone. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, her face bare of makeup, just herself, unguarded. I heard you declined the promotion, she said, falling into step beside him. I didn't decline, Ethan replied, a spark of defiance in his tone. I rerouted. She smiled faintly, a warmth breaking through. Still stubborn. You're one to talk, he shot back, his smile mirroring hers. They paused at a glass case displaying NextGen's milestone moments, a framed photo of the original founders shaking hands under a corporate banner at its center. Sophia stared at it, her voice soft. I spent 15 years chasing that version of success. Now it just looks small. Ethan watched her, quiet, letting her words settle. She turned to him, searching his face. Do you think people like me can really change? He studied her, his gaze steady. I think people like you already did. The moment you stopped defending what broke you. Sophia's eyes welled, but she blinked the tears away, her strength holding firm. I have something for you, she said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a worn sealed envelope. This is the original rejection letter I signed at Stanford. I don't know why I kept it. Guilt, maybe pride. She handed it to him, a single sentence scrawled across the front in her handwriting. Every voice deserves to be heard, even if we hear it too late. Ethan took it, their fingers brushing for a fleeting moment, a silent exchange of trust. I don't hate you, he said finally, his voice soft but certain. I don't expect you to love me either, she replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I don't think love needs expectation, he said, just recognition. Her smile deepened, true and unguarded. Then maybe I'll start learning that language too. They stood there, no rush, no headlines, just two people who had crossed oceans of pain to meet at this quiet crossroads. Before parting, Sophia added, a Japanese tea set is being delivered to your house. It was my mother's. She asked me to give it to someone who understands what it means to sit quietly and begin again. Ethan blinked, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. That's a lot of trust. She said you reminded her of my father, Sophia said softly. A man who said little, but meant everything. She turned to go but paused, her voice steady. And Ethan, when you start that program, teach them the power of apology, not just for others but for themselves. I will, he said, his gaze unwavering. She walked away, not as a CEO or a fallen leader, but as a woman finally free of her armor. Ethan watched her go, a weight lifting from his chest. Not triumph, not closure, but breath. A new beginning that needed only to whisper. 6 months later, the cool air of early spring brushed Ethan's face as he walked Lily up the steps of the San Francisco Academy of Global Languages. Nestled between two brownstones, the school was unassuming outside, but alive with a quiet magic within. Children's laughter spilled from open windows, mingling with the scent of rain on brick. Lily's hand tightened around his, her backpack bouncing with each step. Do you think they'll like my drawing? She asked, her voice bright with hope. Ethan knelt to zip her jacket, his smile warm. I think they'll frame it. Lily grinned, her missing teeth a badge of joy. Miss Foster said I used too many colors. He chuckled, the sound full and unguarded. Miss Foster needs more colors in her life. Lily giggled, her laughter a melody. You always say the best comebacks after the moment. I'm practicing, he said, standing, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Inside, the halls buzzed with soft energy, teachers greeting Ethan like an old friend. Not with awe, but with the quiet reverence reserved for someone who had once cleaned these floors and now shaped their future. In the lobby, a glass plaque gleamed, freshly installed. The Brooks Initiative, because silence isn't always peace. The words on the glass plaque, the Brooks Initiative, because silence isn't always peace, struck Ethan Brooks like a quiet thunderbolt. He hadn't known the board would immortalize Lily's words, penned at 8 years old. His throat tightened, a lump of pride and awe catching there. Crouching beside her, he whispered, You see that, Lily? Her wide eyes sparkled as she nodded, fingers brushing the glass. That's your voice out there, for everyone to hear. She looked up, her voice small but certain. Does this mean people can't ignore me anymore? Ethan smiled, his heart swelling. They never could, sweetheart. They just weren't listening right. Lily turned, watching children pour into the San Francisco Academy of Global Languages. So many cultures, so many faces, her small frame standing taller, braver. I'm ready, Dad, she said, her voice steady. He kissed the top of her head, a silent vow. Then go show them what a Brooks can do. She skipped off toward a classroom, her laughter trailing like sunlight. At the reception desk, an administrator waved Ethan over. Mr. Brooks, a package came for you this morning. International. She handed him a carefully wrapped box, long and rectangular, its weight familiar even before he opened it. Japanese craftsmanship. He waited until he was home, where sunlight spilled across his kitchen table to unwrap it. One by one, he laid out the contents. A cast-iron teapot, its surface etched with quiet elegance. 2 ceramic cups, delicate yet sturdy, and a folded note, written in delicate brush strokes. Ethan recognized the kanji from his teaching days. We are all quiet once, but now we learn how to be quiet together. Beneath a single initial, SC, tucked into the box's fabric lining, was a sandalwood tea scoop, engraved with simple block letters. No armor needed. Ethan exhaled, a weight lifting from his chest. That afternoon he made tea, Not out of habit, but with presence. Each movement deliberate, a quiet peace settling over him. It wasn't a ceremony, it was something deeper, a communion with the moment. Later on the fire escape, Ethan sat with his legs dangling, steam rising from the cup in his hand. The city hummed below, alive and restless. His phone buzzed. Claire Nguyen's voice came through, warm with excitement. The first scholarship application came in, a 15-year-old from Baltimore, fluent in Spanish, Mandarin, and silence. Ethan smiled, sipping his tea. Let's teach her how to turn silence into power. I'll draft the acceptance letter. A pause, then Claire added, Sophia emailed. She's in Kyoto studying under her uncle. Tea ceremony lineage. Says she's learning the language of patience now. Ethan laughed gently, the sound soft against the night. Tough dialect. She wanted me to tell you, Claire continued. She's still practicing how not to flinch when she listens. Ethan looked inside where Lily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, sketching with a dozen crayons, her world vibrant and unbound. How's Lily doing? Claire asked. Ethan's voice softened, full of quiet pride. She's blooming. That night, Lily climbed into his lap, her sketchpad brimming with color. Look, she said, her voice proud. The drawing showed two figures, Ethan and Sophia, standing side by side in a glass room, not holding hands, just present. Behind them stood Lily, clutching something glowing, a sun, a lantern, a beacon. What's that you're holding? Ethan asked, his voice thick. My voice, she said simply. It used to be small, but now it lights things. He swallowed hard, the weight of her wisdom anchoring him. Before tucking her in, he hung the drawing above his desk. In the stillness of the house, he sat at the table, staring at the empty teacup across from him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Late spring sunlight poured through Stanford's cathedral windows, gilding the heads of students, alumni, faculty, and those once invisible among them. At the podium stood Ethan Brooks, no longer in a janitor's uniform, but a modest charcoal gray suit, a lapel pin shaped like a single ear, the logo of the Brooks Initiative, glinting softly. Behind him, a banner declared, "To hear is to honor." His eyes found Lily in the front row, swinging her feet in polished shoes, her face alight with anticipation. She clutched a handmade sign. He listened first. Ethan adjusted the mic, took a breath, and began, his voice steady yet resonant with hard-won truth. I used to think language was about persuasion, that the right words could make people listen. I was wrong. Words can't fix what silence leaves unfinished. The loudest sound I've ever heard was being dismissed. The room stilled, not with politeness but with raw, earned attention. Years ago, I applied to Stanford's linguistics department. I had papers, data, a wife who believed I could change the world through the beauty of sound. They never wrote back, but life did. I became a janitor, cleaning the offices of those I once studied beside. I gave up the podium, but never the purpose. And I raised a daughter who taught me that voice is more than vocabulary, it's daring to exist out loud. A movement stirred in the back row. A woman slipped in, her soft gray coat catching the light, her hair pulled into a low bun. Sophia. Ethan paused for a heartbeat, his voice unwavering. Today, I don't stand here because I fought harder. I stand here because I forgave louder, because I realized those who denied me weren't evil. They were afraid to hear something that challenged their script. He smiled, not bitterly, but gently. Now I teach students not just to speak, but to stay when someone else is speaking. Because language doesn't save us. Listening does. Applause rose, warm and steady, like a tide lifting all it touched. As Ethan stepped off the stage, Lily rushed to him, her grin wide. You didn't cry, Dad. I did, he said, tapping his chest. In here. She held up a folder, her eyes sparkling. Can I show you now? Inside was a new drawing. Ethan and Sophia seated at a small table, a teapot and two cups between them, their hands reaching across, not touching, but offering. Beneath in Lily's looping cursive, we don't always need to win. Sometimes we just need to sit long enough to understand. He kissed her forehead, his voice thick. You drew peace, baby. No, she said thoughtfully. I drew what happens when people stop yelling inside. Outside, sunlight bathed Stanford's steps in gold. Ethan emerged, Lily beside him, as Sophia approached. They stopped. Not awkward, not unsure, just still. You flew in, Ethan said softly. I had to hear it, she replied, her voice untranslated, raw. Lily looked up at her. You came alone. Sophia smiled, a warmth breaking through. No one comes to truth with an entourage. They laughed unguarded, the sound light as the breeze. Ethan held up the drawing. She's getting good. Sophia's eyes lingered on the teacups, a flicker of memory passing through her. She remembered, she said. So did I, Ethan replied, his gaze steady. Sophia reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small velvet pouch. She handed it to Lily. It's a wind chime, made from broken Kyoto porcelain. Lily opened it, the delicate, imperfect shards shimmering. It sings when the wind's just right, Sophia said. Not all songs need an instrument. Lily hugged her without warning, and Sophia froze, then wrapped her arms around the girl, her tenderness surprising even herself. As Lily ran off to chase butterflies near the garden, Ethan turned to Sophia. I never needed an apology, he said. I needed a witness. I didn't come to say sorry, she said, meeting his gaze. I came to listen. The breeze stirred, carrying the faint chime of distant porcelain. Ethan stepped closer, his fingers brushing the inside of her wrist, where a bracelet of braided tea leaves and sandalwood rested. No words passed between them, only a shared presence. A language forged in quiet victories, the kind no one claps for, but everyone feels. Their stories, once interrupted, now began anew, not with declarations but with the stillness of understanding, a testament to dignity, redemption, and the love that grows in moments too quiet to be named.